So in the last week video, I talked about multi-factor authentication in AWS. I talked about how to attach an MFA token to an API call and how to restrict access based on the existence of MFA credentials in the session token. Now this video goes into details on how to use a Yubikey in multi-factor authentication, specifically how you use a Yubikey device when you authenticate against the AWS API. Before I jump into the details, a brief recap of what I described in the last video. Multi-factor authentication is about proving who you are by providing clues that only you would know, only you would have, or only you would be. In AWS, multi-factor authentication is mostly implemented as two-factor authentication. AWS checks for what you would know and what you would have. What you would know is your password, and what you would have is an MFA token code. On the other hand, what you would be is subscribe to this channel because this is the kind of content that you'd like to see in the future. Also, feel free to go for that bell icon and select all option because that lets you know when I upload a video to YouTube every week. Thank you. Now back to the topic. Everyone knows about passwords, but MFA token codes, they can be generated by a virtual authenticator app or a security key like a Yubikey, or even a hardware token. Like I demonstrated in the video, using a virtual authenticator app is pretty easy. You just have to register the device and start using the app. There is some nuance in how AWS implements multi-factor authentication based on the type of MFA token that you would register in AWS. If you use a virtual authenticator app, AWS uses OATH-TOTP protocol for both web console authentication and the API authentication. But if you use a security key that supports FIDO U2F, AWS uses FIDO U2F for web console authentication but keeps on using TOTP protocol for API authentication. Now, I didn't go into details about these two protocols in the last video. It was already longer than I wanted it to be. But briefly said, TOTP or time-based one-time password protocol works by using a pre-shared key and the current timestamp to build a hash that can be compared at both ends. So these two parties are the authenticating party and the relying party, and the same value can be generated at both of these ends, and one party can provide that value to the other party to be authenticated. This pre-shared key is exchanged when you scan a QR code when you register an MFA device. And because timestamp is involved in this value, you usually have to race against the time to input the code into the website or whatever the place you're trying to authenticate against, because that time window of usually 30 seconds expires and then that token becomes invalid. There are certain variants where you can use a 60-second time window as well. On the other hand, FIDO U2F is a somewhat new protocol based on the WebAuthn framework that uses public key cryptography. In FIDO U2F, both the authenticating party and the relying party exchange public keys, so both of these parties cannot be confused against something else that pretends to be them. Compared to TOTP, this is somewhat slow to be adapted, but it has seen some popularity, especially in the recent past. If you have heard of passkeys, that's also a protocol based on FIDO U2F. FIDO U2F takes care of attack vectors that are not really considered in TOTP. So in my opinion, FIDO U2F is a way better protocol when it comes to the ease of adapting multi-factor authentication and just making everything more secure. But for some reason, AWS keeps on using TOTP for the API. So if you want to use a Yubikey in AWS, you need to use a device that supports both FIDO U2F and TOTP at the same time. When it comes to Yubikeys, all devices support FIDO U2F, but only a subset of devices support TOTP protocol. So before making this decision, you have to make sure that your device supports both of these. So let's explore how to do this. The plan is to register the Yubikey device twice, once as a FIDO U2F device so that you can go through FIDO U2F protocol for web authentication, and the second time the Yubikey will be registered as a virtual authenticator app, and I'm going to use a utility that can invoke the TOTP module inside the Yubikey device. This utility is called Yubikey Manager. This is provided by Yubikeys, the same company that produces Yubikeys, and it uses the SDKs to talk to the TOTP module instead of the usual FIDO U2F module that you would work with. This first step, registering the Yubikeys device as a FIDO U2F device, was done in the last video, so I'm not going to repeat that. If you want to know more details, go back to that video. It explains this process step by step. So before I can do anything, I need to install the dependencies for this utility. For Linux, it's pretty easy. It's just an apt install. After that, it's another easy step to install the Yubikeys manager. Right, so now that's done, we need to register this device in AWS as an authenticating party. For that, I'm going to go into AWS, add a new MFA device, and specify a meaningful name. Now I'm going to use this name down the line to manually build an ARN value, so I'm going to keep that name short, and instead of selecting security key, I'm going to use virtual authentication application to get a pre-shared key. So in this step, you'd usually scan this QR code to get the pre-shared key, but since we are using a Yubikeys, we can't scan anything. I'm going to get the secret key in base 32 encoded value, and I'm going to copy it down to a place that I can use it later. So before we can complete this step, we have to add 2 token codes from the device. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the terminal and register this AWS account as a relying party in the Yubikeys. For that, I'm going to use the utility that I installed earlier, and I'm going to add this account as an auth account. To do that, I'm going to have to use an ARN that is not generated yet. To do that, I'm going to copy the account ID and use that name I used earlier in the previous step. And the utility asks for the secret key, and I'm going to paste in the key that I copied earlier. And that's that. The AWS account is registered as a relying party in the Yubikeys device. Now to complete the other side of this transaction, I have to generate 2 consecutive codes. Now in the past, I have seen that if I try to generate 2 codes immediately after adding this relying party, the codes tend to be invalid. I'm not sure what the cause of this issue is. It could be some timing function not warming up inside the key. It could be lack of entropy inside the key for cryptographic operations. But I have seen success if I wait 5 minutes before starting to generate token codes. So after waiting some time, I generate 2 consecutive codes. Now when doing this, try to generate the codes once every say 10 seconds, because you can't really see that 30-second window expiring like you would in a phone application. So after providing the 2 consecutive codes, I have completed the registration process. Now I can use this device to provide MFA token codes in a get session token API call. So I'm going to go back to this terminal session. In this session, I have permanent credentials that I can use to invoke get session token command. Now this is the same command that I used in the last video. I'm going to use the same ARN that I used before. Instead of looking at the phone, I'm going to use that command I used earlier to generate the token code. And I'm going to do that by including the command as a bash subshell. If you're not familiar with this bash syntax, this is basically running this command, getting the output of that command, and then using that output as a value for this token code argument. So with that, I get a set of credentials, and I'm going to use those credentials to start a new terminal session. And from that terminal session, I'm going to invoke an API command. It doesn't matter which command this is, I just want to generate a CloudTrail event that I can inspect. And when I go to CloudTrail and inspect that event, I can see in the session context, MFA authenticated is set to true. And that's it. That's all I wanted to show. I don't really have anything to say to end this video. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.